Well, I'm not going to talk chargers in this video here. However, I wanted to still wear something referencing California here. And plus, I like this baby blue color. You can probably say it's one of my favorite other colors here. But here we are up to personal vlog number 81 here. I'm going to say Canada has their own version of California. So I'm going to call this one British Columbia is Canada's California here. As this definitely could be a new marketing idea for Travel BC. Contact me first, because maybe I'll give you this idea here. But one potential motto you can use is "We're Canada's California," because there's definitely a lot of elements that is in British Columbia that is very similar to the state of California here. Definitely with scenery, the various landscapes, and there's some climates in some areas that you could think that you are in California. And I've been to just the southern part of the state. It's been over 20 years, and I definitely need to relive some California dreaming here. But there is some parts that I was in Southern California, especially in the Los Angeles, Anaheim, and San Diego area there, that got me thinking, this reminds me of this part in the Okanagan Valley in British Columbia here. And speaking of dreaming here, you can maybe also say that Canadians sometimes fantasize and dream about going to British Columbia and thinking, it might be nice to maybe potentially live there. We definitely love going there to go on holidays, and I definitely do that myself when I go on holidays, various parts of the province here. However, then we also get reminded on, that it just costs a little more, and my views definitely might not line up with some parts of the province, not to get too political here, but it definitely also reminds me of California, how Americans, they always dream about California. And I know the Mamas and Papas also had a song called California Dreaming, and it's definitely, I say, a nice dream to live out. And it's the most populated state in the U.S. there, and actually more people live in California than the whole province or the whole country of Canada there. But there's more people that live in British Columbia than in my province in Alberta there. I mean, there's definitely a lot of elements that's very similar to what I think British Columbia is Canada's California. I mean, obviously, it's on the west coast, or left coast, we also like to say, around the Pacific Ocean there. And definitely I have seen some nice scenery on the west coast. Being in the Vancouver and Squamish, I think that Sea to Sky Highway, it's the Vancouver to Squamish part that's the part that definitely blows away and has the scenery there. After past Squamish there, it's just another mountain valley drive there. But you definitely get that as well, obviously in California, but a much longer coast there, just the way how it works geographically there. But you can say the fact that both California and British Columbia are on the Pacific coast there, and you can maybe extend that also to Washington State and Oregon there also, when you look at geographics there. But that's just a small part of why I think you could say British Columbia is Canada's California there. And I haven't been to San Francisco, but a lot of people compare to Vancouver to San Francisco. It just in terms of climate and just the geography and climate there. Although Vancouver is definitely a much flatter city than what I see on San Francisco there. And I know that I remember when I was going on a family vacation there, that we were driving around San Diego, and I know my dad driving the rental car said that he felt like there was parts in San Diego downtown that felt like driving in San Francisco with all the hills there. But climate-wise, especially on the west coast there, it's very temperate there. And you could also say one of the reasons why I would consider British Columbia as Canada's California is because, especially climate, there's definitely a lot more a comfortable climate here. I mean, definitely Canada gets a reputation for being cold and snowy here, and not to the extent that you see up in the Arctic here, which is a small percentage of the population that live in the territories in the Arctic here. But here in Alberta, we definitely get our snow and cold here. And I know that some people actually they come from Vancouver and come here, and sometimes they say that they like the winters here in Calgary a lot more. They say, well, despite the fact that it's cold, but I like the fact that you do get a lot of cold days in Calgary, but you get a postcard picture blue sky. That Vancouver gets the reputation of always being rainy, and definitely during the winter you get a lot more rain there, and but here in Calgary you also get breaks with Chinooks there with the west wind there, where it gets a lot rainier and snowier in parts of British Columbia, where the dry warm wind from the friction of the mountains blows in to Calgary, and that's where you get the warm up there. But I'm just talking about Vancouver and the climate there. But the other thing I find interesting in British Columbia that has parts in California here is that thinking of the landscapes and what are the immediate landscapes that come to mind when you think of Canada. I mean, everyone thinks of the mountains, the coast, the cold, the ice, the prairies, and that's what I love about living here in Alberta. And I'll eventually make another personal vlog where I just talk about that I think Alberta is the most diverse landscape province in the country here. That here, in Calgary, you got prairies to the east, you got mountains to the west here, you got various lakes here. Those are, might be some of the things that you could summarize Canada. The mountains, the prairies, the forest, and that especially, in the central and eastern part of the country there. And, you got the two coasts, or three if you count the Arctic there. But most people associate either the Pacific or Atlantic coast there. But, in between, because I'm going to mention the Okanagan Valley, that in between you got the Pacific coast and the greenery, and you got the Pacific Mountains, and you got the Rocky Mountains there, and then you got prairies here. But kind of in between, especially in the southern part of the interior there in the Okanagan Valley, and I definitely love going there, and various communities. Like Kelowna is definitely the heart of the Okanagan Valley, and then outside of Vancouver and Victoria there is the biggest city in British Columbia there, and actually Kelowna is definitely a bigger city than Regina here, especially if you count the West Kelowna. I know it used to be called West Bank there, but it's now West Kelowna on the other side of the Okanagan Lake there. But let's not discount Kamloops. It's another, different experience in Kamloops there. And then obviously, you got Penticton, and then you got Okanagan Falls and Soyuz, and that's just before you go into the Oroville in Washington State there. But what's very interesting about the Okanagan Valley, and I know there's a San Bernardino Valley in California there, that you get the semi-arid, especially in the summer, and it's definitely nice to go there in the summer because you can get temperatures well over into the 30s there, but it's dry. Because that's definitely one thing I noticed. Because one year I did a British Columbia vacation where I went to Kelowna first, and then I went down to Soyuz, and then I went to Vancouver for the weekend there to catch the BC Lions game, and it just worked out very nicely when I planned that holiday. That I was checking to see when I planned the trip, and I was oblivious to the schedule. That I was thinking, I'll go to Vancouver for the weekend to see if the Lions are playing that weekend, and I not only saw they were playing that weekend, they were happened to be playing the Stampeders that weekend, so I definitely had to go to Vancouver there. But what I did, and then I went back to Kelowna before I went back to Calgary here, where you got to see these various landscapes here. But, I packed it where I looked at the weather forecast, and I was like, well, it's going to be 32, 33 degrees in, Kelowna and the Soyuz there. And 35 is kind of where I draw the line before I say it gets too hot. If the humidity is, also 30% there. So I figured, I looked at the forecast, like, well, it's going to be in the high 30s for the whole time I'm in the Okanagan. But it's only going to be 20 degrees when I'm in Vancouver. And then I figured, I'll bring some pants and longer sleeve shirts here, thinking, after being in the Okanagan for a week, going to Vancouver, that, it's going to feel a little cooler there. In fact, I remember that holiday there, I actually sweated more when I was in Vancouver than I was in the Okanagan there because of the humidity. And it's just amazing now. You think, just a couple kilometers away from the, the coast there, you get this semi-arid, dry valley there, and, definitely got Soyuz and you always hear about that being like the hotspot of the country. There are no other communities that I like, is Ashcroft, and then there's Lytton and Lillooet. Those are other parts that regularly get to be like the hottest part in the country. Record the highest temperature in the country there. I know that Merritt's another community that I saw, and I have a friend from high school that lives there and showed me around. And apparently, that's the country music capital of Canada there. But I know Merritt was a community that I always sometimes used as a pit stop there if I was driving in that interior in Vancouver there, because it's where it's just where all the highways meet there. Because you got Hope and Merritt, and that's where you have like the different 97s and the 5 continuing, because Merritt's kind of maybe halfway between Hope and Kamloops there, and then you got to branch off to go to Kelowna there. But I just find it's fascinating with the climate there that it's semi-arid and dry there, and also lots of wine there. I know when I was growing up in the 90s there, Kelowna is definitely a much different place now 30 years later than it was 30 years ago when I remember going to Kelowna there, but I didn't hear much about, I think the wine industry was just starting. That now has really taken off there, and they definitely have the ideal climate to grow wine in British Columbia. I know slowly you're seeing a few more wineries popping up in Alberta here, but it's definitely a much harsher climate here because we get colder winters there, and we got to worry about summer hailstorms and destroying the crops there. But that's definitely one thing you see in California that you get in British Columbia, especially in the Okanagan Valley. There's lots of wineries and vineyards there, and I definitely did some wine tours and tastings there, and around the Okanagan Lake there. You get the whole scenery. It looks like you're in a different part of the country there, and you're thinking you're sort of in a desert here. And there'll be other parts that I'll talk about when I do the Alberta landscape video personal log down the road here. But and also I remember one time when I was staying in Kamloops, and I was gonna go to Merritt to visit a friend from high school there, and actually it was on spring vacation I did one year, and actually they were record highs because it was already over 30 degrees in Kamloops here. It was definitely a huge shock here, as it was still fairly cool in Calgary when I went there. And one of the traditional things I do on my annual spring vacation is stop at Lake Louise just to see how much snow and ice is still there. But then eventually I get into Kamloops and wow, it's starting to get hot, and it was record highs. But there was one drive there where I drove near to Ashcroft, and that there was Spence's Bridge there where I stopped in. I took a scene around there. I know there's video of that as well. That it definitely felt like I was in the desert, and I was trying to remind myself that I'm still in Canada, I'm still in British Columbia, but definitely interesting landscapes there, and it's just that whole Okanagan Valley there, and it's another element that you think of California, especially Palm Springs. I know is a community in California that has that reputation of being extra hot and arid and dry, and it's like not too far from the the ocean coast there geographically wise, but it's definitely another fascinating thing. And then obviously I've also seen the northern part of the north central part of the province there. There's definitely future trips that I plan to do that, because this past summer I went to Dawson Creek there, and I went there because that's where the Alaska Highway started, and it definitely gives you an idea of the vast landscape of how they built that highway, and also just the whole transportation corridor that's been developed here. And you can theoretically do that highway and drive all the way down to Central America, and if you can find a way to get over that Panama Canal and go into South America there, it just gives you an idea of the vast landscape of the road network here. But Northern California definitely has a lot of farmland, and also the fact that you get more forest and mountains, and I know Lake Tahoe is definitely a big community there. You definitely get a lot of that in British Columbia with all the mountains everywhere here. I know that the Kootenays is definitely also another place I like to visit, especially Fernie, which, there's definitely some elements in California that's similar to that. But, ski villages, winter villages there. And then I know that Highway to Hell show I saw on Discovery Canada there. I know they definitely highlighted the Coca-Cola, how brutal it is, but I know there was another stretch of highway in Northern California too that highlights that it could be a nightmare to drive there too, similar to the Coca-Cola in British Columbia here, but just like California, there's definitely some areas of the state and province by comparison here that you go out to the mountains, go skiing, and I know that Yosemite National Park in California. I think that's definitely a lot more unique. That I can't think of anything that I can compare to British Columbia here. And then the northern part of the province here, where it was in Dawson Creek. It almost felt like it was close to the Alberta BC border there, but that's actually one of the few parts of the province that isn't mountainous there, and it felt like I was still in Alberta with the farm landscape with the foothills and the fact that there's a lot more oil and gas up there too, and it's also similar that when you look at the population density both in California and British Columbia here, where there's definitely differences of views where they always think the northern part funds the south part, and I know in California there's issues with the water where you got the northern part having the water, but the south needs it a lot more there, and there's always that, not to get too political here, but it's kind of similar to that too, that I still think most of the province is generally conservative, but there's the pocket on the west coast there that's definitely a lot more social and liberal there, but that's where most of the population lives there, but you kind of get that divide too, and in California there, and I know that some were thinking that maybe California should split, but I don't think that'll ever happen. I know there was a proposed state of Jefferson there, as I know Redding is one community that's in the northern part of the state there that I don't know, it's definitely different. I know that the biggest city in the north central part of British Columbia is Prince George, and I made a cameo there where I did when I went to Dawson Creek there, and then I drove down. Eventually I was going to go to McBride and stopped in Prince George there, and then eventually swing back to McBride. It's just how geographically is that you definitely do a lot of scenic rides because of the mountains in British Columbia here, but you definitely get that same thing in California here. And I know I do dream to want to do a California trip one time where, let's say I would fly to like Sacramento and see the northern part of the state, and then go drive that Pacific Coast Highway and eventually go to Los Angeles, San Diego there, and I'm not too sure if I'll ever dare to go to Tijuana here, but getting back to what I mentioned at the beginning here, that I gotta say British Columbia is Canada's California. That there's a lot of elements there, the west coast, the dry, arid valley, the Okanagan Valley, the wineries, and then there's various lakes and mountains and ski villages there that province definitely has to offer here, and there's just a lot of similar landscapes that you see in California that is in British Columbia here. And I think just the differences of landscapes and people's views that it's very similar. And then we always seem to dream about going to British Columbia and thinking, man, it'd be nice to live there, and then you might hold off a little when it comes to the economics here, and then obviously Vancouver kind of has the small Canada's Hollywood, where you obviously got Hollywood and Los Angeles in the United States there, but there's definitely a lot of productions that go out in Vancouver as well there, so that's another thing you can add in with the movie and entertainment industry. Obviously Hollywood is definitely the king when it comes to that, but Vancouver definitely films a lot of movies as well that you may or may not know about, but that's definitely another thing if they want to change their marketing. I know it's you boast in pride, and I might debate it a little, that when you go into British Columbia, you see the sign that says "Welcome to British Columbia, the best place on earth." Here, I like my Wild Rose country too in Alberta, but there's a lot of, it's a very broad term to define what's best place on earth here. But this could be an idea for Travel BC. Market it as we're Canada's California. Talk to me first, because I gave you that idea, because I haven't heard anyone else said that, and I just think that would be a brilliant marketing campaign to promote British Columbia, because there's lots of elements that's very similar to California. I know that I've seen very many commercials. I know there's still one where it's Travel California, and I know there was that commercial where at the time Arnold Schwarzenegger was the governor of California there, and at the end the commercial is like, when do you start, or something like that. And, they joked about board meetings and that. I mean, yeah, definitely surfing is also a big part of culture in British Columbia, especially on the coast there. Vancouver, Victoria, on the Vancouver Island there. But you got the wine, you got the Dry Valley, you got the West Coast surfing. There's lots of skiing, lots of lakes there, and you also got some farm areas, remote areas away from the major population centers there, and there a little bit of oil and gas as well. That there's still a lot more that I want to see in British Columbia, because when I went to Dawson Creek, that was actually the furthest north I've ever been. And now that I've learned about the Alaska Highway and see communities along the Alaska Highway, that's definitely going to be another holiday for some time in the future that I'll start at Dawson Creek. And it'd be nice to drive up to Whitehorse and into Yukon and Fairbanks in Alaska there. But that definitely is a holiday there. But there's definitely similar adventures you can do in British Columbia that you can do in California. But what do you think of my perspective here? I mean, I think I gave good points that I think British Columbia is our California. We have a little bit of California in Canada here, and it's very similar experience, not to the big known extent, but I mean, more people live in California than the whole country of Canada, which definitely is another way to look at it, or another way you can look at it as 1/8 of Americans are Californians, because that's how many people live in California here. So that's just my personal vlog. So I'm gonna say, if you want to follow along with this Calgary sports fans journey, home of the Flames, Hitmen, Roughnecks, and Stampeders, I mostly do talk Calgary sports and talk other sports on my channel here. I know this is my NFL team. I still prefer them as the San Diego Chargers, but Los Angeles I guess will do. And oh yeah, speaking of San Diego, I know when I went to San Diego, we went to SeaWorld there, and you got a Vancouver Aquarium at the zoo there in Stanley Park there. So the other thing that we can do, and you can also do whale watching, getting back to what I do on my channel, I mean, obviously sports and Calgary sports, personal vlogs where I come up with a topic, or sometimes if it's time topic, I make that, and I do some attempt at comedy. I call it attempt at comedy. I'm trying to be funny or share my stories out to you, and then I also capture moments at a sporting event. We're on the road there, and there's definitely playlists where I show spots in British Columbia that I also like to call Canada's California there. So if that sounds like y'all be interested to watch, do follow along with this Calgary sports fans journey. You know what you do, just make sure you hit like, subscribe. I also have my other social media links down in the description below there for other ways you can reach me out and stay in touch and find out what else I plan to do on my channel here. So, let's go Chargers, go Bolts. It would be nice maybe one of these years they win the Super Bowl. Lost out on the Tom Brady sweepstakes, but Father Tom eventually has to catch up with him too. But it would have been weird anyway if he was a Charger after all the times that he was a Patriot, beating the Chargers in the playoffs. But hey, what if? But as I say, I'll see you in the next video here.